Sign the divorce papers now. It's over.
No, please don't do this. Just sign it, you loser.
She was 5 minutes into active labor when he walked into the hospital room with the papers, not to hold her hand, not to support her through the contractions that were coming every 3 minutes now, with the brutal efficiency of a body that had decided the time was now. He walked in with a manila folder and a pen, and the specific expression of a man who had identified a window of opportunity and was exploiting it before it closed. She looked at him through the haze of pain and exhaustion and the epidural that was helping but not enough, and she understood in that moment what she had been refusing to understand for 9 months. He had been waiting for this, for the exact moment when she was most vulnerable, most desperate, most likely to sign anything just to make him go away, so she could focus on the thing her body was demanding she focus on. He set the papers on the hospital tray in front of her and said 4 words that would cost him everything he thought he had built. Sign it. Right now, she signed it, and he left. And 6 months later, when Adrian Cole walked into the board meeting of the company he had spent 7 years building, he found his ex-wife sitting at the head of the table in his chair. And she said 5 words that ended his career. I just bought your company. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Olivia Winters had been in labor for 14 hours when Adrian walked in. 14 hours of contractions that had started as manageable discomfort and had progressed into the kind of pain that occupied every available thought. That made conversation impossible and planning impossible, and left only the immediate requirement of breathing through one contraction, and then breathing through the next one and then the next. The specific endurance test of labor that every woman who had ever given birth knew, and that no one who had not been through it could fully understand. She had been alone for 12 of those 14 hours, not because she had no one. Because Adrian had said he needed to handle something at work, something urgent, something that couldn't wait even though his wife was in labor with their first child. And Olivia had been too tired at hour 2 to argue about it. Had simply nodded and watched him leave, and had returned to the work of labor with the nurses beside her and the epidural providing enough relief that she could think in fragments between contractions. She had not expected him to return with papers. Had not expected the folder or the pen or the expression on his face that was not the expression of a man whose child was about to be born, but was the expression of a man executing a plan that required specific timing. He stood beside the hospital bed. Did not sit in the chair the nurses had positioned for support people. Did not touch her. Did not ask how she was or how much longer the doctor thought it would be or any of the questions that belonged to a person who was present for a birth, rather than present for a transaction. I need you to sign these, he said. Olivia looked at him through the specific fog of labor and epidural medication, her brain processing slowly what her eyes were seeing. Papers. A pen. Adrian's expression that had nothing warm in it. What are they? Divorce papers, he said, simply, as if this were ordinary. As if requesting a signature on divorce papers while your wife was in active labor was the kind of thing that required no explanation beyond identification. Adrian, a contraction hit. She gripped the bed rail and breathed through it with the technique the nurse had taught her. The specific pattern of breathing that was supposed to help, but which mostly just gave her something to focus on besides the pain. He waited for the contraction to pass. You need to sign them now, he said, before the baby is born. It's cleaner this way. Olivia looked at him, at the face of the man she had married 2 years ago. At the person she had believed, with the complete conviction available to someone who was 26 and in love, was the person she would build a life with. Cleaner, she repeated. The custody arrangement is already outlined, he said, as if this were helpful information. As if the problem was that she needed more details rather than that he was asking her to sign divorce papers while contractions were coming every 3 minutes. You get primary custody. I pay support. It's all very standard. You just need to sign. He set the folder on the hospital tray, opened it, placed the pen beside the papers. "Why now?" she asked. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. Not because she was asking quietly, but because labor had taken most of her volume. "Because waiting makes it complicated," he said. "Once the baby's born, the custody negotiation changes. There are more variables. This way everything is settled before another contraction, harder than the last." She closed her eyes and breathed and counted, and somewhere in the middle of the counting, she understood that he had planned this, had waited specifically for labor, had chosen the moment when she was least able to fight or negotiate or do anything except want him to leave, so she could focus on delivering the child, who was going to arrive regardless of weather. Papers were signed. She reached for the pen. "Olivia," a voice said from the doorway. She looked up. The labor nurse, Maria, stood in the doorway with the expression of someone who had seen enough in 20 years of labor and delivery to recognize situations that were not medically urgent, but were wrong in ways that mattered. "You don't have to sign anything right now," Maria said. "Not to Adrian, to Olivia. You can have an attorney review it. After the baby is born, after you've rested." "She wants to sign it," Adrian said. "It's mutual, we discussed it." "Did you discuss it today?" Maria asked. Her voice had the specific quality of a nurse who was not arguing but was creating space for her patient to think. "We discussed it weeks ago," Adrian said. Which was not true. Which was a lie so clean and complete that Olivia would have called it out if another contraction had not arrived at that exact moment. If her body had not demanded her complete attention for the next 90 seconds. When the contraction passed, she looked at the papers. At the sections marked with yellow tabs where signatures were required. At the custody section Adrian had mentioned. At the division of assets section that seemed longer than it should be for a marriage that was 2 years old, and that had not accumulated significant joint property. At the name of the attorney who had prepared them. Grant Morrison, the same attorney who handled Adrian's company's legal work. The same attorney who had been Adrian's college roommate. She picked up the pen. "Olivia," Maria said. "It's fine," Olivia said, not because it was fine. Because she had made a calculation in the space between contractions, had understood that arguing about this now, in labor, with Adrian standing beside her bed refusing to leave until she signed, was going to cost her more energy than she had available. And that the energy she had available needed to be reserved for delivering a child who was going to arrive in the next few hours regardless of what she did with these papers. She signed where the yellow tabs indicated, 5 pages, 5 signatures. Each one taking longer than the one before as the contractions intensified and her hand shook, and the pen moved across paper that was going to determine the legal architecture of everything that came. After this moment, she finished the last signature. Adrian took the papers, checked each signature, closed the folder. "Thank you," he said. He left. Maria stood in the doorway for a moment with the expression of someone who had just watched something that violated the basic decency of how people were supposed to treat each other, and who was processing the violation in real time. "I'm sorry," she said to Olivia. Olivia said nothing, laid back against the hospital bed. Let the next contraction arrive and the next and the next. Let her body do the enormous work it had been preparing for 9 months. Let everything, except the immediate physical demand, fade into the background. Her daughter was born 4 hours later at 3:47 in the morning. 6 pounds, 8 ounces. Healthy, loud from the first moment. Olivia held her in the delivery room with Maria beside her, and the doctor finishing the post-delivery work, and no Adrian anywhere, because Adrian had left with his signed papers and had not returned. Had not been there for the birth, had not met his daughter, had simply gotten what he came for and departed. Maria had looked at the baby. At Olivia, back at the baby. "What are you going to name her?" "Victoria," Olivia said. "After my grandmother." "That's a strong name," Maria said. "It needs to be," Olivia said. Before we continue, kindly hit the subscribe button and tell us where you are watching from 2 years before the labor room. Olivia Winters had been exactly the kind of woman who built careful plans. Not impulsive, not spontaneous, careful. The kind of woman who understood that the distance between where you were and where you wanted to be was crossed through the sustained application of intelligent decisions over time. Through the specific discipline of choosing correctly more often than you chose incorrectly, and accepting that the results of those choices would arrive gradually rather than immediately. She had grown up as the youngest of 3 daughters in a family where her father, Jonathan Winters, had built a private equity firm from a single client and a spare office into a company that managed $2.3 billion in assets across 47 investments. She had watched him do this across her entire childhood and teenage years, had absorbed the specific lessons he taught not through formal instruction, but through observation. Through watching how he evaluated opportunities, and how he decided which ones to pursue, and how he built relationships that lasted decades. He had taught her 3 things that mattered above all others. First, that the most important thing about any investment was not the return but the downside protection, the understanding of what you could lose and whether you could survive losing it. Second, that the best investments were the ones other people didn't recognize as investments until you had already made them and the value was obvious. Third, that patience was a competitive advantage that most people did not have the discipline to deploy. Olivia had taken these lessons into her 20s with the intention of building something of her own, not joining her father's firm, though the option was available, building her own. Something smaller and more focused, something that reflected her specific interests and capabilities. She had started with real estate. Small multi-family properties that were undervalued because they needed work. She had spent 3 years learning how to evaluate properties accurately, how to identify the ones where the work required was cosmetic rather than structural, how to manage contractors and tenants, and the specific financial architecture of leveraged real estate investment. By 25, she owned 4 properties. By 26, she owned 9. By 27, when she met Adrian Cole at an industry event, she owned 14 and was generating $180,000 annually in rental income after expenses. Adrian had approached her after a panel discussion where she had been speaking about tenant retention strategies. He had the specific confidence of a man who believed his attention was valuable and who presented that belief as obvious rather than arguable. He ran a software company, he told her. B2B solutions for property management, growing rapidly, 23 employees and projected to double in the next 18 months. They had talked for 40 minutes. He had asked for her number. She had given it to him after calculating that the risk of giving it was low and the potential upside, if he was actually as interesting as the 40 minutes suggested, was worth the minimal exposure. They had dated for 8 months before he proposed. The 8 months had been good in the ordinary way that 8 months are good when 2 people are discovering each other, and the discovery is producing more compatibility than friction. They had traveled twice, had dinner with each other's friends, had met each other's families. Though Olivia's father had reserved judgment with the particular neutrality of a man who understood that evaluating a person required more than 8 months of observation. The proposal had been in a restaurant, public. Romantic in the way that public proposals are romantic. With other diners watching and applauding, and the specific pressure of a yes being the only socially acceptable response, unless you were willing to create a scene. Olivia had said yes, she had meant it in the moment. Had believed that the 8 months had shown her enough of who Adrian was, that the commitment was safe, that the downside was managed. That the relationship was the kind of investment her father would recognize as sound. She had been wrong about the evaluation. The first year of marriage had been fine, not perfect, fine. The specific fine of 2 busy people managing their own projects and maintaining a household, and discovering that living together required more negotiation than dating had required. The pregnancy had been planned in the sense of not prevented, rather than specifically scheduled. They had discussed wanting children eventually, and had decided that eventually could be now. And Olivia had stopped her birth control and had conceived within 3 months with the specific efficiency of a woman whose body was prepared for the work. Adrian had seemed happy about it, had said the appropriate things, had attended the first 2 prenatal appointments, and had then begun missing them with increasing frequency as the company demanded more of his time. As 23 employees became 40 and 40 became 60, and the growth he had projected was arriving and was requiring his complete attention. Olivia had been understanding about this, had been the kind of wife who recognized that building a company required sacrifice, and that the sacrifice sometimes fell on the partner who was not building the company. She had not recognized, until month 6 of the pregnancy, that Adrian was not just building a company. He was preparing to exit a marriage. The name was Simone. Olivia had found it in month 6 the way these things are always found, through the specific carelessness of a person who has become comfortable in their deception and has stopped being as careful as they need to be. A text thread visible on Adrian's phone on the kitchen counter, not explicit, but frequent. Messages about meetings that ran long and dinners that were necessary, and the specific coordination of 2 people who were seeing each other with a regularity that suggested something more than professional. Olivia had not confronted him immediately, had instead done what her father had taught her to do, which was to verify before acting, to build the complete picture before addressing any single element of it. She had verified across 6 weeks. Simone Park, 31 years old, operations manager at TechBridge Partners, the venture capital firm that had led Adrian's Series B funding round 18 months ago. Single according to her LinkedIn profile, though that meant nothing. Attractive in the specific curated way that professional women in tech were attractive, the presentation that suggested competence more than availability. The verification had been cleaner than Olivia wanted it to be. Restaurant reservations under Adrian's name on evenings when he had told Olivia he was at the office. Hotel confirmation emails that appeared in the credit card statement she had access to because their finances were joint. The specific pattern of a sustained affair that had been ongoing for at least 4 months before Olivia found the first message. She had sat with this information for 2 weeks. Had calculated what to do with it. Had arrived at the conclusion that confronting Adrian while pregnant was a negotiation. She was not positioned to win. That the power dynamics of a pregnant woman confronting an unfaithful husband were not favorable. That the better strategy was to wait until after the baby was born and then address everything from a position of greater strength. She had not known that Adrian was calculating differently. Had not known that the reason he had been careful about the affair, and careful about the messages, and careful about everything was because he was building toward a specific moment. A moment when Olivia would be at her most vulnerable, and when he could execute a plan that gave him everything he wanted with minimal resistance. That moment had been the labor room. And Olivia, sitting in a hospital bed 4 hours after signing papers she had not wanted to sign, and 3 hours after delivering a daughter who was asleep in the bassinet beside her. Understood with the specific clarity that arrives after enormous physical effort that she had made a strategic error. She had believed waiting was the stronger position. She had been wrong. Adrian had not waited, had instead exploited the exact moment when she was least able to resist. And now the papers were signed, and the divorce was filed, and the custody arrangement was established, and the division of assets was documented, and everything that should have been negotiated had instead been executed during contractions. She picked up her phone, called the one person who would answer at 4 in the morning without asking why. Her father. Dad, she said. Olivia. His voice came through immediately alert despite the hour. Is the baby? She's here. Victoria, she's perfect. Olivia paused. But I need you to do something, anything. I need you to call every attorney you know who handles contested divorces. I need appointments set up for next week. I need someone who can review papers that were signed under duress and determine if they're enforceable. She looked at her daughter in the bassinet. And I need you to pull up every investment your firm has ever made in technology companies, specifically software, specifically B2B property management solutions. A pause on the line. Why? Because Adrian's company is going to need another funding round in the next 12 months, Olivia said. Her voice was steady despite the exhaustion. And when they go looking for investors, I want us to already be in position to make an offer they can't refuse. Another pause. Longer. You're going to buy his company, her father said. I'm going to buy his company, Olivia confirmed, and then I'm going to fire him, in front of his entire staff. 6 months from now, maybe 8, however long it takes to put the pieces in place. She looked at Victoria. He made me sign divorce papers in active labor, Dad. He waited until I was at my most vulnerable and he exploited it. And I'm going to show him what happens when you exploit someone who has resources you didn't know existed. 6 months, her father said. 6 months, she agreed. I'll make the calls, he said. She ended the call. Lay back in the hospital bed with her daughter beside her, and the divorce papers signed, and the next 6 months already arranging themselves in her mind, with the specific precision of a woman who had just learned the most expensive lesson of her life, and who was going to ensure that the person who taught it to her paid every cent of the tuition. What Jonathan Winters sets in motion in the next 72 hours. What Adrian discovers when he walks into his board meeting 6 months later, and what Olivia's face looks like when she tells him he's fired. Jonathan Winters made 11 phone calls in the 72 hours after his daughter called him from the hospital. 4 to divorce attorneys, 3 to forensic accountants, 2 to private investigators, 1 to his firm's lead venture capital analyst, 1 to Adrian Cole's largest competitor. By the end of 72 hours, he had assembled a complete picture of Adrian's company finances, his funding history, his burn rate, and the exact date when the company would run out of operating capital if they didn't close another funding round. That date was 4 months away. And Jonathan Winters, who had spent 34 years building a private equity firm by understanding exactly when to enter negotiations, understood that 4 months was exactly enough time to position his daughter as the only investor Adrian Cole could not afford to refuse. Adrian had made one catastrophic error on the day he walked into that labor room with divorce papers. He had assumed that the woman signing them had no resources beyond what he could see. He had not asked about her family. He had not asked about her father. He had not asked the single question that would have told him everything he needed to know. And now that error was going to cost him the company he had spent 7 years building, one call at a time. The divorce attorney's name was Patricia Chen, and she had been practicing family law for 26 years. Olivia met with her 8 days after Victoria's birth, in an office on the 14th floor of a building downtown. With her father in the waiting room and Victoria in a carrier on her chest, and the signed divorce papers in a folder that she set on Patricia's desk with the specific care of a woman handling evidence, Patricia read through the papers for 11 minutes without speaking. When she finished, she set them down and looked at Olivia with the expression of an attorney who has seen many things across 26 years, and who has developed a precise instrument for categorizing them into things that are legally sound and things that are legally questionable, and things that are so far outside the bounds of acceptable conduct that they create their own category. He had you sign these in active labor, she said, not a question. A confirmation based on what the paperwork itself showed, the time stamps and the notary signature, and the specific documentation that indicated when and where the signing had occurred. Yes, Olivia said. How far apart were your contractions? 3 minutes. Patricia made a note on her legal pad. And you were on an epidural at the time? Yes. Did he give you time to read the full document before asking you to sign? He told me what was in it. I didn't read every page. Olivia paused. I was in labor. Reading required focus I didn't have available. Patricia looked at the papers again, at the asset division section that Olivia had signed without reading fully. At the custody arrangement that was, Patricia could see immediately, weighted heavily in Adrian's favor in ways that Olivia had not understood when she signed it. This custody arrangement, Patricia said, gives him alternating weeks starting at 6 months, which means starting next month. Olivia's face changed. The section I signed said I get primary custody. You get primary physical custody for the first 6 months, Patricia said. Then it converts to 50-50, alternating weeks. It's in paragraph 4 of the custody addendum. She pointed to the relevant section. Olivia read it. The section she had not read in the labor room because another contraction had arrived, and Adrian had been standing there waiting, and she had needed him to leave so she could focus on delivering a baby who was not going to wait for legal review. That's not what he told me it said, she said. I'm sure it's not, Patricia said, because what he told you was designed to get you to sign, not to inform you of what you were signing. She set the papers down. Ms. Winters, this document was signed under duress. You were in active labor, you were on medication, you were not given adequate time to review. And the person presenting it to you was your husband, who had a direct conflict of interest in the terms you were signing. So it's not enforceable, Olivia said. It's challengeable, Patricia corrected. Which is different. We can file a motion to set it aside on grounds of duress and inadequate representation. We'll argue that you were not in a mental state to enter into a binding agreement, that the timing was deliberately exploitative, that the terms were not adequately explained. She paused. But we'll need to do it before the 6-month mark, before the custody schedule changes. If we wait too long, a judge is going to ask why you waited, and waiting suggests the duress was not as significant as we're claiming. How long do I have? Ideally, we file this week. Patricia looked at Olivia, at the 8-day-old baby in the carrier, at the exhaustion visible in Olivia's face despite her composure. Can you do a deposition this week? I can do whatever needs to be done, Olivia said. Patricia almost smiled. The specific almost smile of an attorney who had just understood she was working with a client who was going to be an asset rather than a liability in the courtroom. Then we're going to set this aside, she said. And we're going to do it in a way that makes sure Adrian Cole understands he made a very serious error in judgment. The private investigator's name was Marcus Rivera, and he had been working with Jonathan Winter's firm for 9 years. He had spent the first 72 hours after Jonathan's call building a comprehensive file on Adrian Cole's company, TechBridge Solutions, which was the name Adrian had given the software platform after his Series B funding round, when the venture capital firm had suggested the original name, Property Connect, was not sufficiently broad for the direction they wanted the company to grow. Marcus's report arrived in Jonathan's office on day 4. 47 pages of financial analysis, competitive positioning, employee retention data, and burn rate calculations that told a story Adrian Cole probably understood, but had not yet disclosed to his board or his investors. The company was running out of money, not immediately, not in the sense of payroll bouncing next week, but in the specific sense that the growth trajectory Adrian had promised his Series B investors required capital, that the company was burning faster than revenue was arriving. And the gap between burn and revenue was widening rather than narrowing, which meant that somewhere in the next 4 to 6 months, the company was going to need another funding round, or the growth was going to stop, and the investors were going to start asking uncomfortable questions. Marcus had identified the exact month when the capital would run out. February, 4 months from the day Olivia gave birth. 5 months if Adrian cut expenses aggressively, which he would not do because cutting expenses meant slowing growth, and slowing growth meant missing the projections he had given his board. Jonathan read the report twice. Then he called his firm's venture capital team. I need a full evaluation of TechBridge Solutions, he said. Property management software, B2B. Series B funded 18 months ago. I want to know what they're worth, what they're projected to be worth, and what kind of offer would be competitive if they go looking for Series C in the next 6 months. The lead analyst, a woman named Sarah Kim, had the evaluation completed in 8 days. Her conclusion: TechBridge was a solid company with strong fundamentals and a competitive product, but it was overextended on growth and underperforming on revenue conversion. Which meant it was exactly the kind of company that looked good on paper and struggled in practice, unless someone came in with capital and operational expertise and forced the discipline that the current leadership was not imposing. What would we offer for a controlling stake? Jonathan asked. 22 million, Sarah said, at a valuation of 55 million. That gives us 40% and control of the board if we structure it correctly. Structure it, Jonathan said. Sarah looked at him with the expression of someone who had worked for Jonathan Winters for 6 years and who had learned to recognize when a deal was being pursued for reasons that were not entirely financial. Is there something about this company specifically? She asked. The founder, Jonathan said, made a serious error in judgment involving my daughter. I'm correcting that error. And I'm doing it in a way that generates a return for the firm. Sarah nodded. This was the thing about working for Jonathan Winters that made people stay for decades. He was ruthless when ruthlessness was required, but he was never dishonest about it. If he was pursuing a company for personal reasons, he said so. If the deal made financial sense regardless of the personal reasons, he pursued it. If it didn't, he didn't. This one made sense. I'll draft the term sheet, she said. Adrian Cole received the first indication that his company was going to need more money on a Tuesday in December. His CFO, a man named Thomas Grant, who had been with the company for 3 years, walked into Adrian's office with a spreadsheet and the expression of someone delivering news that was not surprising, but was not pleasant. We're going to run out of runway by February, Thomas said. March if we cut marketing spend by 40%, but that kills the growth numbers we promised the board. Adrian looked at the spreadsheet. At the burn rate, at the revenue projections that were ambitious but not unrealistic if everything went well, which was the problem with revenue projections, they required everything to go well. How much do we need? 20 million minimum to get us through the next 18 months, Thomas said. 25 if we want to maintain the growth rate. Series C, Adrian said. Yes. TechBridge Partners still in. I'll call them, Thomas said. TechBridge Partners, the venture capital firm that had led the Series B and whose operations manager, Simone Park, Adrian had been seeing for 6 months now, expressed interest immediately when Thomas reached out. They were prepared to lead another round, same terms as Series B standard dilution, board seat retention, but they wanted to see other investors at the table. They wanted the risk spread. They wanted validation from the market that TechBridge Solutions was worth the valuation Adrian was claiming. Find us 2 more investors, TechBridge Partners said. Serious ones. 20 million total. We'll do 10 if you find 2 others who'll do 5 each. Adrian spent 3 weeks reaching out to his network, found one investor who would commit to 3 million. Found another who would commit to 2 million conditional on larger investors coming in first. Neither was sufficient. He was sitting in his office on a Thursday in January, 4 weeks from the point where payroll would become a problem, when Thomas came back with a name. Winters Capital, Thomas said, private equity. They've been doing some venture work recently. Tech adjacent. I sent them our deck 2 weeks ago. They just responded. They want to meet. Winters, Adrian said. The name landing in his office with a weight he could not immediately identify, but which his instincts told him was significant. Jonathan Winters, Thomas said. The firm's been around 34 years. Solid reputation. They're offering 22 million for 40%. 40% is too much, Adrian said. 40% is what gets us through the next 18 months without another conversation like this one, Thomas said. And their terms include operational oversight. They want a board seat and quarterly review authority. They want control. They want to make sure we don't burn through 22 million the way we burned through the Series B, Thomas corrected. Which is reasonable given our current position. Adrian looked at the name on the term sheet Thomas had handed him, Winter's Capital. The specific combination of letters that he knew, somewhere in the back of his mind, he had heard before but could not immediately place. Set up the meeting, he said. The meeting happened on a Tuesday in late January. Jonathan Winters arrived with Sarah Kim and 2 associates from his firm's venture capital team. They sat on one side of the conference table in Adrian's office. Adrian and Thomas sat on the other. Simone Park joined via video call from TechBridge Partners, present as the representative of the Series B investors who wanted to see the Series C terms before they committed to participating. Jonathan Winters was 61 years old and moved through the meeting with the specific economy of a man who had been in thousands of these meetings, and who understood that the most important thing about a negotiation was not what you said, but when you said nothing. He said very little for the first 40 minutes. Let Sarah present the valuation analysis. Let the associates present the term sheet terms. Let Adrian and Thomas ask their questions and voice their concerns and make their counteroffers. Then, at minute 43, when Adrian had relaxed slightly and Thomas was beginning to discuss implementation timeline, Jonathan spoke. I have one condition, he said. Adrian looked at him. What condition? You retain your position as CEO for the next 6 months, Jonathan said. After that, the board evaluates your performance and determines whether you continue or whether we bring in outside leadership. The room went quiet. That's not standard, Adrian said. Neither is burning through a Series B in 18 months, Jonathan said. His voice remained level, not hostile, simply factual. Your growth numbers are impressive, your revenue conversion is not. Your team is strong, your financial discipline is weak. We're investing 22 million. We want assurance that the money is being managed by someone who understands that growth without profit is not growth, it's expensive hope. I've built this company for 7 years, Adrian said. And you've done well, Jonathan said, but the question isn't what you've done. It's what you're going to do with $22 million. And we need to see 6 months of results before we're confident you're the person to do it. Adrian looked at Thomas, at Simone on the video call, whose face was carefully neutral. At the term sheet on the table in front of him, that was the difference between making payroll in March and not making payroll in March. 6 months, he said. 6 months, Jonathan confirmed. At which point the board, which we will control, makes a decision about leadership going forward. Adrian signed the term sheet that afternoon. The deal closed 3 weeks later. Winters Capital took 40% of TechBridge Solutions. Jonathan Winters took the board seat. Sarah Kim took the operational oversight role. And Adrian Cole, who had walked into a labor room 7 months ago with divorce papers, and had walked out believing he had eliminated a problem, had just signed papers that gave his ex-wife's father control of the company he had spent 7 years building. He did not know this. The connection between Olivia Winters and Jonathan Winters had not appeared anywhere in the deal documentation, because Olivia had reverted to her maiden name after the divorce papers were set aside by the court in November. And because Jonathan had structured the investment through the firm rather than as a personal transaction. And because Adrian had never asked his wife about her family, and therefore had no idea that the man who now controlled his company's board was the same man whose daughter he had forced to sign papers. While in active labor, he would learn, in approximately 8 weeks, when Olivia walked into the board meeting as the new majority shareholder of TechBridge Solutions. The board meeting was scheduled for the first Tuesday in March, regular quarterly review. Adrian had prepared his presentation the way he prepared all board presentations, with slide decks and revenue charts and growth projections that showed the company was on track, that the 22 million was being deployed effectively, that the 6-month evaluation would show he was exactly the leader the company needed. He arrived at the conference room at 9:45 for the 10 o'clock meeting, found Jonathan Winters already there, and Sarah Kim, and 3 other people he didn't recognize, and Olivia. She was sitting at the head of the conference table in the chair that had always been Adrian's chair. She was wearing a navy suit. Her hair was pulled back. There was no baby carrier. No visible sign of the person who had been in a labor room 7 months ago signing papers, with shaking hands between contractions. She looked at him with the expression he had never seen on her face in 2 years of marriage, not the softness that had been there when they dated. Not the exhaustion that had been there during pregnancy. Something entirely different. The expression of a person who has built something carefully and is about to demonstrate exactly what they built. "Adrian," she said, "sit down." He stood in the doorway of his own conference room, looking at his ex-wife, sitting in his chair, and understanding that something had happened that he had not been informed of, and that the something was enormous. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I'm the majority shareholder," she said. "As of this morning, I purchased an additional 20% from Tech Bridge Partners. Combined with my father's 40%, which he transferred to me last week, I now own 60% of this company." She paused. "Which means I control the board. Which means I decide what happens next." Adrian looked at Jonathan, at Sarah, at the 3 other people he now recognized as attorneys. "You can't," he began. "I can," Olivia said, "and I did. The transaction closed at 8 this morning. Your CFO received the documentation 30 minutes ago. You would have received it too, but you don't check your email before board meetings." She looked at him with the specific attention of someone who has waited a long time for this moment and is not going to rush through it. "7 months ago, you walked into a hospital room while I was in labor. You handed me divorce papers. You told me to sign them, and you left." She stood up. "You did this because you believed I had no resources, no power, no ability to do anything except sign what you put in front of me and accept what you decided was fair." She walked to where he was standing. "You were wrong. About all of it. My father runs a $2.3 billion private equity firm. I own 14 properties that generate $180,000 a year in income. And I spent the last 6 months positioning myself to buy your company specifically, so I could walk into this room and tell you something you should have understood the day you walked into that labor room." She looked at him directly. "You're fired, Adrian, effective immediately, for cause, which means no severance, no equity vesting, no retention of your shares beyond what you've already vested, which according to your employment agreement is 32%. Which is now worth significantly less than it was this morning, because I'm about to restructure this company in ways you're not going to be part of." The room was completely silent. "Security is outside," Olivia said. "They're going to escort you to your office. You have 20 minutes to collect your personal belongings. Your company email and system access have already been revoked. Your key card has been deactivated." She paused. "You have 30 seconds to leave this conference room before I have you removed." Adrian stood there for 27 of those 30 seconds. Then he walked out. The door closed behind him. Olivia returned to the head of the table, sat down, looked at the 3 attorneys, and Sarah Kim and her father. "Let's talk about the restructuring," she said. "What Adrian does when he realizes the full scope of what just happened, what the company looks like 6 months after Olivia takes control, and what the final accounting reveals about the cost of forcing a woman to sign papers during labor." Adrian Cole walked out of that conference room believing he could fight it. He had built this company for 7 years. He had clients who trusted him. He had employees who were loyal. Surely, he thought, there would be a way to challenge what had just happened, to argue that the termination was not legitimate, to demonstrate that Olivia, despite owning 60% of the company, did not have the authority to simply fire him without cause. He spent the next 24 hours calling attorneys and investors, and anyone who might provide leverage or resources or the specific validation that he had been wronged. And every single person he called told him the same thing, that he had signed an employment agreement that gave the board authority to terminate him, that Olivia controlled the board. That firing him for cause meant exactly what she said it meant, and that the only thing he could do now was accept the termination and move forward. But the worst part, the part that made every conversation more devastating than the one before, was that everyone he spoke to already knew the story. About the labor room, about the divorce papers, about the woman who had bought a company, specifically, to fire the man who had exploited her at her most vulnerable. And nobody, not one person in his entire network, was willing to help him fight it. The news spread through the industry in 48 hours, not through official press releases. Through the specific informal networks of people who work in technology and venture capital, and who share information over coffee and email, and the professional gossip channels that exist in every industry. The story was too good not to share. Too perfectly calibrated to the specific moral framework that most people operate within. Where forcing a pregnant woman to sign papers during labor was so far outside acceptable behavior that what happened afterward felt less like revenge and more like natural consequence. Adrian's phone stopped ringing by day 3. The clients who had been loyal to him, who had chosen TechBridge Solutions because they trusted Adrian specifically, started receiving calls from Olivia and Sarah Kim, explaining that leadership had changed, but the product and service would remain excellent, and would they be willing to stay through the transition? Most of them said yes, not because Olivia convinced them, because the product actually was excellent, and because staying was easier than switching, and because the story about Adrian made staying feel like the morally correct choice. The employees who had been loyal to Adrian, who had followed him from the early startup days through the Series A and Series B, received a company-wide email on day 4 from Olivia introducing herself as the new majority owner and explaining that Adrian had been terminated for cause and that the company was entering a restructuring phase focused on profitability and sustainable growth rather than the aggressive expansion that had been burning capital. 3 employees left in solidarity with Adrian. 57 stayed. Adrian's professional network, which he had spent 7 years building, contracted in the specific way networks contract when a person has demonstrated something about their character that makes association risky. People stopped returning his calls. LinkedIn connections went quiet. The venture capital firms he had relationships with through TechBridge partners suddenly had scheduling conflicts when he tried to arrange meetings. By week 2, Adrian understood that what Olivia had done was not just fire him from his company. She had made it functionally impossible for him to work in the industry he had spent his entire adult life in. Not through active sabotage, but through the passive consequence of everyone knowing the story, and everyone making the same calculation about whether association with him was worth the reputational cost. It was not. He moved to a different city in week 4, Colorado. A friend from college had offered him a guest room while he figured things out. The figuring out took 6 months and resulted in a job at a mid-sized software company doing product management, 2 levels below the CEO position he had left, at a salary that was 1/3 of what he had been making at TechBridge. He took it because it was the only offer he received. TechBridge Solutions under Olivia's leadership did 3 things in the first 90 days. First, they cut marketing spend by 60% and reallocated the capital to product development, which was where the actual value of the company lived, but which had been underfunded because Adrian had believed that growth was the metric that mattered to investors rather than product quality. Second, they implemented a profitability timeline that required each business unit to demonstrate positive contribution margin within 6 months, or demonstrate a clear path to getting there within 12. 3 business units could not demonstrate either. They were shut down. 23 employees were laid off with generous severance packages that Olivia personally approved because the people being laid off had not created the problem and did not deserve to pay for it without compensation. Third, they brought in an operations expert named David Mensa, who had spent 19 years scaling software companies and who understood the specific discipline required to convert a high-growth startup into a sustainable, profitable business. The combination of these three things produced results that surprised the board, though they should not have surprised anyone who understood what Olivia had been doing for the past 8 years with her real estate portfolio. Revenue remained flat through month 3, which was expected during a restructuring, began climbing in month 4 as the product improvements became visible to customers, exceeded the previous year's numbers by month 7. By month 12, TechBridge Solutions was profitable for the first time in its history. Not barely profitable, genuinely profitable. $8 million in net income on $63 million in revenue, which was a margin that made every venture capital investor who had ever looked at the company sit up and revise their evaluation. Sarah Kim presented the 12-month results to the board in March of the following year, exactly 1 year after Adrian had been terminated. Jonathan Winters, sitting beside his daughter at the conference table, looked at the numbers and then looked at Olivia with the expression of a father who has watched his child do something he taught them to do and has seen them do it better than he did it himself. "This is exceptional," he said. "This is what happens when you focus on what actually matters," Olivia said. Adrian was optimizing for growth metrics that impressed investors. "I optimized for profit margins that sustain the business." She paused. "He was building a company that would look good in a pitch deck. I built a company that actually works." Sarah Kim, who had been skeptical 12 months ago about whether Olivia had the operational experience to run a technology company, was no longer skeptical. "What are you going to do with it?" she asked. "Keep it," Olivia said. "Build it, scale it properly this time." She looked at her father. "And in about 5 years, sell it for a number that makes the $22 million look like the down payment it actually was." The custody battle resolved itself in November, 14 months after Victoria's birth. Adrian had filed a motion 6 weeks after being terminated, requesting the 50-50 custody arrangement that the original papers he had forced Olivia to sign had outlined. His attorney had argued that the papers, while signed under challenging circumstances, represented a mutual agreement that should be honored. Patricia Chen had responded with a 47-page brief that included medical records from the labor room, testimony from the labor nurse Maria who had witnessed the signing, and a detailed timeline showing that Olivia had been in active labor with contractions every 3 minutes when Adrian had demanded the signatures. The judge had read the brief, had called both attorneys into chambers, had asked Adrian's attorney one question: "Do you have any evidence that suggests your client's decision to present divorce papers during his wife's labor was anything other than a deliberate exploitation of her vulnerable state?" Adrian's attorney had no such evidence. The judge had ruled from the bench. The papers signed during labor were set aside as signed under duress. The custody arrangement reverted to the standard framework for a child whose parents were divorced, which was primary physical custody to the mother with reasonable visitation for the father, which the judge defined as supervised visitation, given that Adrian had demonstrated judgment that raised concerns about his ability to prioritize a child's needs over his own convenience. Adrian had appealed. The appeal had been denied. He had visitation with Victoria once a month for 3 hours in a supervised facility where a social worker was present. Victoria was 2 years old when she stopped recognizing him as someone significant, when the once-a-month visits became simply a thing that happened rather than a relationship that meant anything. Adrian stopped requesting visits 6 months after that. The social worker had called Patricia to inform her. Patricia had called Olivia. "He's not coming anymore," Patricia said. "Good," Olivia said. "She doesn't need someone who only shows up when it's convenient." 5 years after the board meeting where Olivia fired Adrian, TechBridge Solutions was sold to a larger enterprise software company for $340 million. Olivia's 60% stake produced $204 million before taxes. She kept $140 million after taxes and capital gains. Used $40 million to expand her real estate portfolio to 43 properties across 3 states. Put $60 million into a trust for Victoria that would be accessible when she turned 25. Donated $15 million to organizations that provided legal assistance to women navigating divorces and custody battles without the resources Olivia had access to. Kept $25 million as operating capital for the next thing she was going to build, which she had not decided on yet, but which she knew would arrive when she had enough space to think about what mattered rather than what was urgent. Jonathan Winters called her the evening after the sale closed. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she corrected. "I wrote the check," he said. "You built the company, those are not the same thing." "You taught me how to build it," she said. "The patience, the focus on fundamentals, the understanding that growth without profit is just expensive hope." She paused. "Everything I did at TechBridge was something I learned from watching you. Then I taught you well," he said. "Because what you built in 5 years is something most people don't build in 20. She sat with that for a moment, with the specific validation that arrives when the person whose opinion matters most tells you that the thing you did was done correctly. "Victoria wants to know when you're coming to visit," Olivia said. "This weekend," Jonathan said. "Tell her to pick the restaurant." Victoria was 7 years old when Olivia told her the full story, not the child's version, not the simplified narrative where daddy did something wrong and mommy fixed it, the complete version. Every detail. From the labor room to the divorce papers, to the phone call to Jonathan, to the 6 months of strategic positioning, to the board, meeting to the firing to the custody battle to the sale of the company. They were sitting in the living room of the house Olivia had bought with the real estate proceeds 3 years ago. A house with enough space for Victoria to have her own room and a playroom, and a yard with the kind of morning light that Olivia had been organizing her life around since leaving the hospital with a newborn and a plan for revenge that had taken 6 months to execute. Victoria listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When Olivia finished, Victoria looked at her mother with the serious, focused attention she had been demonstrating since birth. The attention that meant she was processing something important and was going to ask the question that got to the center of it. "Did you buy the company just to fire him?" Victoria asked. "Yes," Olivia said. "That's a lot of money just to fire someone." "It was," Olivia agreed, "but it wasn't about the money. It was about the principle." "What principle?" "That you don't exploit people at their most vulnerable and expect no consequences." Olivia looked at her daughter. "Your father believed I had no power. No resources. No ability to do anything except what he told me to do. And he was wrong. And I used 6 months to show him exactly how wrong he was." Victoria thought about this. "Grandpa helped," she said. "Grandpa helped because I called him," Olivia said. "Because I had built a relationship with him where he would answer at 4 in the morning and would make 11 phone calls and would position his entire firm to support what I needed to do." She paused. "That's the other principle. You build your relationships before you need them, because when you need them completely." "I'm glad you fired him," Victoria said. "So am I," Olivia said. She pulled her daughter into a hug. "Careful the way you're careful with children who are 7 and who are starting to have opinions about being hugged in public, but who still, in private, want the specific comfort of being held by the person who has held them since the day they were born." "One more thing," Olivia said. "What?" "You're named after your great-grandmother, Victoria Winters. She was a lawyer, one of the first women to argue in front of the state Supreme Court. She spent her whole life fighting for people who didn't have power." Olivia looked at her daughter's face. "And you're going to grow up knowing that when someone tries to take your power, you don't just fight back. You build something so complete and so methodical that, when you're ready to act, the action is overwhelming." Victoria looked at her mother with the 7-year-old version of the serious, focused attention. "Like buying a company just to fire someone," she said. "Exactly like that," Olivia said. Dear viewers, When someone forces you to sign papers during labor, they are making a calculation about your capacity to respond. They are deciding that you are at your weakest, that your options are limited. Adrian Cole thought the labor room was the ending. It was the beginning of the most expensive lesson he ever learned, and the tuition was his entire career. Drop in the comments, would you have done the same thing? And tell us, 6 months to fire him, was it too long or was the patience part of the revenge? Thanks for watching. Click subscribe for more stories that educate, entertain, and empower your journey.